The fact is, to me, the most destructive entity on the planet is the Federal Reserve, which leads all these other central banks in destroying currencies and economies. And as we speak, the Fed is losing all of its credibility.
All right, friends, welcome back. We have the one and only Andy Hoffman from Miles Franklin on the line to document the collapse. And I'm telling you what, guys, there's never been so much to document as it pertains to the collapse, which is now clearly in process. Andy, welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me. And yes, so much. It's getting to the point where I'm having trouble staying within my daily writing limits. Today's article was called A 10-Ring Circus of Keystone Cops, because I have that many things to talk about, from the craziness around the debt ceiling and selling the strategic oil reserve to fund it, and India trying to get the people to give back their gold for 1% in interest, and what's going on in Spain, and the Fed meeting in Greece, and it's just too many things to go on, which are just beyond belief.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up. We're recording this call on Tuesday, and I just have to read this for people before we get started, Andy. Jack Lew said, I think last Monday, that he was worried that a terrible event would take place if the U.S. debt ceiling, which he said would be exhausted by November 3rd, 2 days before the previous estimate, if the government didn't raise the debt ceiling. And now from Zero Hedge today, we have Boehner saying about the debt ceiling, the process stinks, but the alternative, Andy, was default. Now, anybody that thinks we are not actually documenting the collapse of the U.S. dollar and the Western banking system, they're out of their minds and their heads are in the sand. We are on the edge of default, and the only thing they can do is keep raising the artificial debt ceiling and printing trillions of more dollars.
Well, it's just a matter of how you define default. Either you default by not paying, or you default by inflating it away, which is exactly what they mean to do. And frankly, the people in government, forget the Fed and the central bank, because the people in government don't realize that that's what they're doing. They think that money just comes out of thin air, and that if you raise the debt ceiling, that you're somehow paying off your debts as opposed to debasing your currency. But in this particular case, I wrote last week an article called "Terrible Debt Accident," referring to what Jack Lew had said, and I wrote in it, and I said, no matter what, of course, the one thing that Congress is good at doing is printing money and spending it. So I had no doubt they would do something. And in this case, they didn't even argue about it. They just did it. But what's crazy about it is, again, remember the debt ceiling was frozen at 18.1 trillion back in March, so they can do these extraordinary measures.
Right.
And now they're going to raise it to 19.6 trillion with a deadline of March 2017, meaning they basically expect to get that far in just 18 months' time. That's a lot of debt. That's 2 years of $700 or $800 billion deficits. Now, when they do pass this, you're going to see overnight the debt is going to go up by probably $500 billion as they undo those extraordinary measures. But what's the craziest thing about the whole thing is, in order to fund it, they said, look, we need to increase defense spending. That was a big part of it. We need to figure out a way to increase defense spending because, as you know, there were rumors that were spreading that Lockheed Martin, which is by far the biggest defense contractor in the world, was about to cut its spending, its overhead, by 30%, meaning a lot of firings. So basically said, okay, we're going to increase debt spending, defense spending, and the way we're going to pay for it is by selling the strategic oil reserve. I mean, I kid you not, they're going to sell, we have 1 month worth of oil in our strategic oil reserve, and we're going to sell it to fund defense spending so we can agitate in the Middle East and potentially cut off our oil supply. And on top of that, it's kind of like the $200 million of gold that supposedly sits in the COMEX, which is nothing. The strategic oil reserve is only $30 billion. I mean, it barely is going to fund anything, let alone if we actually got rid of it, we'd be leaving ourselves vulnerable. I mean, to an oil shortage. It's absolutely incredible how stupid these people are and how much the necessity to protect yourself from what they're doing is becoming.
Yeah, it reminds me of when the UK sold all their gold at, $250, $260 an ounce at the absolute bottom. I mean, we need the oil reserves. But see, that's what the New World Order is going to do to us, Andy. They are going to hold us over the barrel of austerity. It makes perfect sense. We'll sell the oil at a bottom to, $30 billion to fund the military-industrial complex.
But they're only hurting themselves. Again, $30 billion, is not that much. What's important is the oil. If you agitate in the Middle East and have a war and have a shortage of oil, But in doing so, you're going to hurt the United States more than anybody because remember, our shale oil industry has been the only business that has produced jobs over the past 7 years, aside from waiters and bartenders and birth, death, fictitious jobs. So you're only expediting their demise by selling oil into an already collapsing market. And as you can see today, oil has broken down below this $44 per barrel level, which has been support for like 2 or 3 months. And it could easily this, and on top of that, the Saudi oil minister, who ironically said today that the oil price should be set by the by fundamentals. This is the guy who was the head of the oil cartel. So I mean, you put these things together, and you could easily see the combination of these events pushing oil below the lows that we saw a few months ago in the 30s. And we're talking about the biggest industry in America right now going under, and it's also the biggest taxpayer. So by doing so, the government is only hurting its ability to collect money. So again, there's there's a reason why I wrote years back, or a year ago, I wrote crashing oil prices portend unspeakable horrors, because it's not just Middle East wars we're talking about. We're talking about the collapse of financial regimes around the world, starting with the United States.
Right. Well, you know what? I want to circle back to that debt ceiling here in a second, but I got to read you this because as it pertains to how isolated now the United States is on purpose. See, Annie, my thesis has been that the people in charge of this country, the people that sit atop the pyramid, do not care about this country, and they do not care about the people of this nation, which is why they're doing what they're doing. This is all part of a bigger plan to bankrupt and bring this country to its knees. But let's just look at geopolitics. Who's really isolated on the world stage now? All right, Zero Hedge is asking that very question today. Iran set to join BRICS Bank and strengthen ties with Brazil. On the heels of the nuclear deal and Tehran's ground operation in Syria, Iran is stepping up efforts to prove that, contrary to Western rhetoric, it is not in fact isolated. According to the country's economic minister, Iran is now set to join the BRICS Bank. Russia and Putin are really controlling the stage with China at this point. And I know China's got problems, and I know that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors regarding their GDP and their growth, but it's the United States, helmed by the criminal Pentagon, that is isolated.
Right. Well, look, I wrote in my several Death of the BRICS articles and audio blogs over the last year or two. I don't put any credibility into any of those BRICS nations. I mean, for anyone to believe that India or Brazil, my God, Brazil, we may not even have Olympics next year. They're going to have a coup and a revolution over there. I mean, these are dying nations, and for the most part, they're commodity nations, which are in even worse shape. So joining the BRICS is not really a badge of honor. That said, when you talk about isolation, yes, the dollar and the Fed have been responsible for more carnage to currencies and economic regimes and even political and social stability around the world than anyone else. And that's what people are waking up to, is that the Fed has been the ringleader and they have been the cause of all these problems, which is why on a daily basis you're seeing more and more people or countries migrate away from them. And China, for all of its economic problems, and again, in my view, China's bubble is greater than all of the bubbles of the world combined. It's going to be very painful as it continues to collapse. That said, there's no doubt that going into let's call it the New World Order, meaning when these currencies all collapse and we have to start all over again, China is going to be the big power in the world, and more countries are moving to their side. And it's not just the Irans and the Russias, but it's countries in the Western Hemisphere. It's countries in Europe. Everyone knows that the United States has the most overvalued currency and the most debt and the most ill will and the least manufacturing, and then it's going to be suffer the most pain. So people are migrating away from it and its dollar, and eventually the market manipulation that has been really the only thing that's keeping us afloat will break down. I mean, again, for all people who say, "Oh no, they'll be able to keep it up forever," look at what's going on in the world. The CRB commodity index it's barely above its 40-year low right now. The average currency is at an all-time low right now. The global economy is, as I wrote last week, the worst of our lifetime. So they are decidedly losing. All that's left, in my view, is what I call last-to-go markets, like paper, gold, and silver, and the Dow Jones propaganda average. Eventually, they'll lose control of those, whether it's by hyperinflation or by a 2008-style crash. And when they do, there will be a, quote, new world order where the United States is not the world's leader anymore. And whoever is the world's leader is going to be using other currencies other than the dollar as their dominant form of payment. And it's, by the way, going to be backed by something real.
Right. Now, let's just talk about the big picture. Since 2001, since 9/11, this country has turned overtly aggressive across the planet. We have what's called the Department of Defense. I think in and around World War II, that was renamed from the Department of War to make it sound less malevolent. They changed it to the Department of Defense. But clearly, Andy, it is the Department of War. And I think one of the reasons that this country helped topple Gaddafi was because Gaddafi was trying to introduce a single African currency linked to gold, right, through the dinar. And he wanted other African nations to follow suit. And the dinar was widely opposed by the elite. And also, Libya had its own state bank. I think it might have been one of the only nations on the planet that didn't have a Rothschild central bank. So this country helped topple Gaddafi, and now Libya is essentially a hellhole, just like Afghanistan, Iraq, and what we're doing in Syria. So we see the other nation states recognizing this, and we see them turning to Russia and Putin, actually, for some counterbalance and some protection against the aggression of the United States. What do you make of what I just said there? Is our aggression in the Middle East and essentially worldwide just an act to try to support the dollar and keep it from collapsing?
Well, let's face it, when you have these kind of economic times, they always bring about war in one way, shape, or form. Now, there are some people who believe that is a cause in and of itself, that, Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein were willing to stop using the dollar. But, that's inevitable. People are using less and less dollars with each passing day. I think, my simplistic Occam's razor view of it was, back then with oil prices rising, we wanted to get control of oil. And that's, in my opinion, a big reason why we were in Iraq, why we were in Libya, why we were in all these places. Because we wanted control of what was perceived to be a scarce resource. Now, the irony of it is that now oil could not be more polar opposite of a scarce resource. We don't need, no one needs oil. There's too much of it, and there's going to be far more coming online from a lot of these countries, for instance, Iraq and Iran and Libya in the coming years. So, stirring up wars over there, I don't think really is going to matter, other than just kind of, we want something to rally around. We want something to take control of. But it's, economically speaking, there's absolutely no reason for us to be in any of these places. Whereas opposed to a few years back with high oil prices, there was theoretically, you could say there was an economic reason. Now, it's kind of like I wrote the other day. I wrote, at least in Vietnam, we had kind of a reason why we're there. Oh, yes, we were worried about communism. Now, I wrote, well, why are we in Syria? Does anyone have any clue? Is it ISIS? Is it Russia? It's really almost like we're just there to stir up trouble so we can have a reason for our government to do more draconian things. It's basically the simplest way that I can look at it.
Right. Well, I was listening to a very gripping interview between Catherine Austin Fitts and Joseph P. Farrell, actually, that was recorded about a year ago, and I posted it over at thephaser.com if people want to go find that. It is one of the most important and gripping interviews that I've ever heard. And, they talk about, Andy, the core of corruption and the endless corruption in the financial markets worldwide, but specifically on Wall Street. Of course, you've been covering that ad nauseum for years. And, it just leads me to believe that, what we have now are men behind the curtain who are being revealed on a global stage. So what used to work, right, after using the excuse of 9/11, we were able to go into Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11, and then go into Afghanistan, and now the Pentagon guards the poppy fields, and opium production is at an all-time high, while criminal banks like HSBC and others launder drug money. There is an epic amount of fraud on Wall Street, and you know as well as I do that on 9/11, a lot of those financial crimes were covered up. I mean, there was missing gold below the Twin Towers, and, the whole WTC-7 debacle with all the Enron documents. Do we live in the absolute epitome of endless criminality? Is that what this is?
Yeah, it's not the first time in history there's been an epitome of criminality, just not on this big of a scale and certainly not global. But again, these things are all immaterial when you look at the simple fact that the financial situation is collapsing upon them. And, talk about the man behind the curtain. The fact is, to me, the most destructive entity on the planet is the Federal Reserve, which leads all of these other central banks in destroying currencies and economies. And as we speak, the Fed is losing all of its credibility. I mean, look, they were supposed to be raising rates back in March, and they're going to meet tomorrow, and probably they're going to be even more uber dovish than ever. Eventually, we're going to have what I call the Yellen reversal, where she leaves all pretense of there being a recovery and says, yeah, we're going to have to do a QE4, or we're going to have to lower rates to negative. I mean, that's coming. It's really a matter of when they lose control of enough markets, which is why the Dow is so important to them. But, if oil prices keep crashing and currencies keep crashing, and this final currency war, you looked at what the ECB did last week, and in saying they're going to lower rates, and the Chinese not only lowered rates, they did it during New York market hours, as if they're like trying to get Americans to buy into this. It's really crazy. So I think that between all of these things, all kind of these economic storms hitting at once, I think the central banks are losing not only control but credibility. And when that's completely gone, when Janet Yellen speaks and no one listens, then the end game is truly here. And that's the point where if you don't have your gold and silver, at that point you ain't getting it at any price.
Yeah. Well, you know what? This government still has the plunge protection team and the exchange stabilization fund and, the endless COMEX manipulation and the paper manipulation of gold and silver. And they still control the paradigm. So even if the rest of the world stops listening to what's coming out of Janet Yellen's mouth, right, by proxy, the Rothschilds and whoever owns these central banks, once they stop listening to her, the criminal government and the criminals at the top of the pyramid, they still do what they want. The question is, how long can they get away with it?
But they don't have enough gold and silver
That's
to
right.
keep the game going. Physical stuff. That's the whole point. That's why they're the Achilles heel of the system. That's why we've had massive silver shortages throughout the summer, and we had them in 2008 and 2011 and 2013. It's a warning. What happened this happened, this July through August, where we had these, or through September, these big shortages. Not a particularly big crisis. Yeah, the stock markets went down a little, but it's not like it was 2008. And the industry came close to running out of silver. It's eased up a bit now, but it's still tighter than usual. And the slightest bit of crisis, and we'll have the same problem. And this time we may run out. So that's why it's so important to them to keep people out of it, because it disappears so quickly, like it did in 2008. And this time around, there's nothing that's going to be able to reverse it. They're not going to be able to turn the markets once the next crisis starts. They're not going to be able to come up with gold and silver. They've exhausted their ammunition, and the signs are everywhere. So yes, people may not, they may still have some power in the paper markets, but the physical markets, and not just gold and silver. Look at what's going on in oil, copper, and all these things are where they're losing the war.
Yeah. Well, and the canary in the coal mine to wake up even the sleepiest of sheeple would be $250 silver and $4,500, $5,000 gold. I mean, because CNBC would be forced to cover that, right? And so the ultimate canary in the coal mine of a valueless dollar, a dollar that has lost world confidence, would be higher metal prices, which is why the cartel focuses on manipulating these prices endlessly. And I know you know that, but it needs to be said because people get frustrated with $15 silver. And of course, my response is, my God, take advantage of $15 silver. I mean, John Williams tells us that the 1980 inflation-adjusted high for silver in today's dollars is $601. And I told people just recently in an interview, Andy, if you think $50 silver was too high, if you think that was a ridiculous manipulated price by the Hunt brothers in 1980, fine, cut it in half, $25. That means $300 silver in today's dollar. Do you think?
Well, my number is closer to 1,000. That's or more, depending on your gold silver ratio you use, and that's just basically based on the amount of gold that the Treasury says they have and the amount of dollars they say that are outstanding. Of course, there's a lot less gold than they say they have, and there's a lot more dollars than they say. I mean, it's the same math that got you to $800 in 1980. It's simple math. It's just a matter of when they lose control of the paper markets. And of course they will. They always have throughout history. The only difference is now they have better technology, better derivatives, better means of controlling markets. But as I said, all one has to do is look at what's going on in other markets to realize, I mean, look, the average stock market around the world is in a bear market right now. The average currency is at an all-time low. The average commodity is at or near a multi-decade low right now. This is not what they want. So they can't control everything. And the fact that the Dow is up when you have record amounts of entitlements and a record low labor participation rate and et cetera, across the board. Right, I read a record amount of people donating their blood for money. It's at the point where no one's going to care anymore. And eventually, economic Mother Nature always wins. But yes, it's very frustrating, and there's nothing you could do about it other than protect yourself. And in my case, I've done so by leaving everything imaginable in the paper realm and just owning the physical stuff. I feel great.
I think over time we've established that I believe things are a little bit more orchestrated at the very highest levels than you do. But did you happen to see the cover of The Economist here in 2015, the very occult, riddled cover that had so much of the imagery and suggestive imagery? There was a nuclear explosion on it. There was Alice in Wonderland. There was Obama, Clinton. Do you remember seeing the cover of The Economist?
I did not see that.
Oh, you missed that one. Okay. Well, I just have to tell you this. On that cover, and I'll send it to you so you can just take a look at it here. On that cover was Alice in Wonderland with her back looking at the group of the world's leaders, and at her feet were two arrows. And on the feathers of the arrows were 11.5 and 11.3, 11.5 and 11.3, which people now are speculating are dates. Because isn't it funny that Jack Lew has now come out and said, oh, we're worried we're going to run out of money and there's going to be a terrible event on November 5th. And then he restated it and said, oh, you know what, we recrunched the numbers, it's even worse, it's going to happen on November 3rd. I mean, what a crazy coincidence, you know? Do you believe that sometimes the elite like to tell us what they're going to do before they do it to us? Do you ever sort of follow that line of thinking?
No, you know that's not the way. I mean, look, there's a lot of people have a lot of incentive to say these things, and we've already been through. We just passed through October 7th. We passed through 2015.75. We passed through the Mayan thing, whatever, a few years ago. There's always something out there that's getting people scared. But until I see something happen, look, I know what's going to happen in the big picture financially,
Right.
and I try not to think about the political stuff. I mean, I only have so much bandwidth out there to try to focus on things that I have an expertise in, where I find there's at least some kind of information, that's provable. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nefarious forces out there. Some of them are out there for reasons that are maybe bigger than others. I think most of them are there just to preserve the status quo because they do well with it. But you just never know, and it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt to keep looking for as much as you can.
Right.
Maybe you'll find something.
Yeah. Even though we may not see eye to eye on what the elite are up to, I truly believe a lot of this has been orchestrated for many, many years from the very highest levels, and I believe that they do want to bring and have planned to bring the United States to its knees and bankrupt the people, because a bankrupted people, especially if they take away our guns and do away with the Second Amendment in this country, if they get away with that, then we have no way to fight back, and I think that's been one of the goals of the elite. But regardless, you wrote in one of your recent articles here, 5 years, LOL, try 5 minutes. You wrote, the credit markets are flashing their weakest signals since the 2008 crisis. And that's a big deal because, as we've spoken about with you and others, when the credit markets go, this whole Ponzi goes, right? So
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. They may be able to keep the Dow up, but anyone who's watching the junk bond market sees that it's collapsing left and right. And even some of the big sectors like biotech are starting to fall apart. Some of the market darlings like Tesla and Netflix. I mean, you could see it all around you. The fact that they can keep the Dow higher, which is comical when you see companies like IBM and Caterpillar, which are in the Dow, falling apart. Shows you that it's, again, I showed today an article that showed how market breadth is falling apart again, like it did in 2011 and 2008. Meaning, again, it's very few companies that are going up that make the averages go up. And there's a big reason why the average hedge fund has gotten destroyed for years, underperformed for years. They don't understand, especially if they're trying to get people to give them money with the promise of alpha, meaning outperforming the market. They don't understand it's not been a stock picker's market for years. You basically have to buy the futures for the averages, like the S&P, because that's what the government is buying. That's what the PPT buys. They're not buying individual names. Most individual names are getting crushed. It's just the averages. And, so again, when you've got it to the point where everything is going down except for a handful of manipulated stocks, which clearly have no impact on the economy, certainly not a positive impact, what's the point? I mean, at some point, everyone just, the people in charge lose all credibility. I mean, I've always called it the evil tripod, Washington, market manipulation, money printing, and propaganda. And I've said for a while now, the propaganda leg is broken. No one believes there's a recovery anymore. No one believes a thing like that. Once you've lost that part, all you have left is manipulating markets, and it's becoming more and more obvious, whether it's gold or stocks or these sudden jumps in oil, whenever that that come out of nowhere. Everyone sees that, and so when credibility is lost, then all's lost.
Well, Andy, before I let you go, I just want to talk about the illusion of U.S. economic growth. Again, you wrote about it in that very same article. If we used John Williams' statistics for crunching numbers, if we used honest economics, we would find a very, very different picture than the one painted by the powers that be. Let's talk about the GDP. Let's talk about growth expectations versus reality. They continue to disappoint, essentially, even with their fudged numbers. I wonder if we saw the real numbers, would it become very clear very quickly that we're in a depression, and we've been in a depression for a while now?
Well, the real numbers. In fact, I have the chart in today's article. Earnings for S&P 500 have been negative year over year for I think the last 2 quarters. We're talking, earnings multiples in a large part are based on growth. We're talking about the S&P 500, that manipulated index with the nearly record high multiple, has negative earnings growth right now. Mm-hmm. That's a real number. I mean, that's a number that in a real market the stocks would be plunging. And as for GDP, look, tomorrow they're going to report, or Thursday they're going to report GDP, the day after the Fed meeting. And again, the Fed's own number, the GDP now says it's going to be plus 0.8%. And again, as you said, that's a fudge number. The real number is much lower. And the street is still at 2 or 3 times that amount. I mean, it's unbelievable how these people keep overestimating forever. And I worked on Wall Street. I understand the hockey stick concept and always estimating higher than things are going to be. But I mean, just in the last 2 days, my God, look at the numbers, the new home sales, the durable goods orders, consumer confidence, PMI, service, Dallas Fed, Richmond Fed. These numbers are all collapsing. They're not just collapsing, they're negative, just like the S&P 500 earnings. And yet we still have some people out there saying, well, will the Fed raise rates in December? Are you kidding? Raise rates on December 19th, the week before Christmas? I mean, in a million years, that wouldn't happen. Look, the Fed is never going to raise interest rates. The Yellen reversal is coming. I'm not sure what will catalyze it. There will be negative interest rates in QE4, and there will be more economic pain and falling commodity prices for as far as the eye can see. The U.S. and half a dozen. U.S. and most other countries in the last year changed their definition of GDP to include a whole bunch of things which are not revenue producing. Right. Just to goose it up so that it makes the debt to GDP number look lower than it really is. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, you can't gauge these. Just like all these government data that comes out, whether it's unemployment or inflation or durable goods orders, they really think that they can guess how much these things are. The one thing I'm sure of on all counts is that they overestimate absolutely everything. And if you had a true measure of GDP, it would be dramatically lower, meaning actual revenue producing activities throughout an economy. Just like if you had a true measure of debt, meaning you put all that off balance sheet stuff back on and all the contingent liabilities, it'll be a lot higher. It's like Greece, we've seen all these numbers. And by the way, Greece is not doing the reforms it's supposed to, so they're not getting the supposed bailouts. And Greece is going to fall apart any day now. But Greece, they tell you that the debt is $300 or $400 billion euros, and it turns out the number is more like 650 billion because of all the off-balance sheet stuff that they have. And in the derivatives, it's all out there. The numbers are far worse on all counts. They're multiplying rapidly. And again, that's why the concept of higher interest rates is so comical. Even the tiniest increase in interest rates destroys everything. Forgets overvalued stock market valuations, which are based solely on record low interest rates. We're talking about the United States with its 18 trillion, 19 trillion, 20 trillion, pick your number, of debt to fund. I mean, a 0.1% increase in interest rates makes a big difference. So no, there's the real numbers in all cases are a lot worse. This is what happens at the end of a Ponzi scheme. You find out that everyone owes a lot more money than they said, and they have a lot more liabilities that you didn't know about. It's not like you're going to find any good news. You'll never have unexpected good news about debt or economic activity in the latter stages of such a Ponzi scheme.
All right, yeah, well, I'll leave you with this. Now, we've talked a lot about where is the hyperinflation. Jeff Bezos is now worth $53.2 billion. I think that's where the hyperinflation is, Andy. It's in these crazy stock prices. It's just insanity.
Yeah. When I worked on Wall Street, and I left Wall Street 10 years ago, I worked at Solomon Smith Barney for 6 years. there was only a handful of $100 stocks in the world. I'm trying to think. I'm even Cisco never got to $100 at its peak. It was always Berkshire Hathaway was 10,000. Everything else was in the double digits. Now you got, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of crap companies with 100, 200, 300. Chipotle, $800 a share. And again, the market caps. It matters how many shares are outstanding, but that's where the Fed's money has gone into inflating high-end real estate, rare art, stocks, of course, bonds that they buy, etc. And it'll all crash on them. It always does.
Why don't you tell people about the blog and tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to purchase some physical metals for protection?
Sure, Miles Franklin, Precious Metals, been in business for 26 years now. Not a single registered complaint. Just call us 800-822-8080. Go to milesfranklin.com and you can see my blog that I do every day for free. Or you can email me at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com.
Yeah, and guys, I'm going to just leave you with this. I've been hitting on this a lot. I think it's very important. If the 1980 inflation-adjusted all-time high for silver, according to John Williams, is 601, based on an all-time high then of 50, right? In today's dollars, it's 601. If you think 50 is too high, okay, well, maybe it should have been 25. That's $300 today. Too high at 25? Cut it in half. $12.50. That's $150 an ounce in today's dollars. And, you can buy silver right now for $15 an ounce. Thanks a lot, Andy.
Thanks, as always.
All right, brother. Have a good one. And, guys, thank you for tuning in. We very much appreciate your support at sgtreport.com, at thephaser.com, and thelibertymill.com. Real news, truthful news, the antidote to corporate propaganda, 24/7. God bless.